Hi guys, welcome back to Monday. This week we're going to talk about the Great Depression. Not a really great time in the history of the United States, but a really important one because it helps to shape what we are, who we are today. So I'm going to read pages 189 through pages 198 for you today. And then tomorrow we'll go through the rest of the chapter, the New Deal in Action, because we're going to talk about the actual Great Depression. And then we'll talk tomorrow about everything that FDR is going to do to get the United States out of the Great Depression. Just also remember that I did give you an alternative assessment. So you can go through the PowerPoint as well. And you can answer the questions that are in the PowerPoint. You guys get to choose what you do, okay? But if you do the PowerPoint, you still need to do the questions on page 189. So you still need to do the key themes and concepts. And you need to do the questions on page 206 as well. You need to do the, they're not there. So I guess you don't need to do those. Maybe they're someplace else. Nope, just the questions on page 189, please. And then when we get back, I'm going to have you guys do the Regents questions as well. All right, so we're starting with the Great Depression. It's the time period after, really in between the two world wars. United States goes broke, basically. People have no money. They're living in things that we call Hoovervilles, and we'll talk about that. In that PowerPoint, I posted some links for videos for you to watch. They're real short videos. None of them are longer than 5 minutes. Maybe one is 5 minutes, 55 seconds. But they are a good little overview about everything, okay? So the big idea in the 1930s, fundamental weaknesses in the nation and world economies caused a stock market crash and the Great Depression that followed. This is a super important topic right now. It's kind of interesting, ironic that we're covering the Great Depression during this time in our history, in our life, because people are very concerned about what is going to happen to our economy today because of this coronavirus. So I don't think we'll go into another Great Depression, but these are things that people are thinking about right now. They're kind of having the same questions. So we're talking about the Great Depression dominated every aspect of political, social, and economic life. President Herbert Hoover's efforts toward economic recovery did not succeed. People really did not like him. The New Deal, which is what we're going to talk about tomorrow, was based on the belief that government had a responsibility for the social and economic well-being of its citizens. And also, President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal provided relief, but only limited recovery and left a legacy of economic social reform laws. So, like I said, you still need to answer the questions on page 189, even if you are going to choose to do the PowerPoint. So, page 190, we will start with the Great Stock Market Crash. The end of prosperity in the 1920s was marked by a series of plunges in the United States stock market in the fall of 1929, known as the Great Stock Market Crash. Throughout the 1920s, the stock market had grown on speculation by people who bought on margin, so they're buying stocks on credit, and in fact owned a small portion of their stocks. Many could not meet margin calls, demands to put up money to recover their loans. The result was panic selling. On October 29th, Black Tuesday alone, stock values fell $14 billion. That's $14 billion back in 1929. So imagine that today. They dropped lower and lower in the weeks, months, and years that followed, reaching bottom in July 1932. By then, the market had fallen 89% from its September 1929 high point. The stock market crash triggered the start of the Great Depression. So if somebody's going to ask you what started the Great Depression, it is the fall of the stock market, this stock market crash on Black Tuesday, okay? It shattered the national sense of optimism and confidence of the 1920s. The crash dramatically exposed the fact that the national economy had serious weaknesses. Causes of the Great Depression. The Great Depression was caused by an unsound economy, overproduction, and underconsumption. So they were making too many products that we learned about last week in the 1920s. And, you only need one refrigerator, so people kept making refrigerators, but we didn't need them anymore. So we have overproduction and underconsumption. Oh, Badashti's texting. Overexpansion of credit and fragile corporate structures combined with ineffective government action. The growing interdependence of international trade and banking made the effects even more damaging. Weaknesses in the overall economy, so page 191. Weaknesses in the economy had existed before 1929 and were expanding. The agricultural sector had been depressed throughout the 1920s with a worldwide drop in prices. Unemployment plagued the railroad, coal, and textile industries well before 1929. Speculation in real estate and the resulting building boom had declined, so it went down. The number of bank failures was rising as farmers, people speculating in stocks, and consumers buying on credit could not repay their loans. As early as the summer of 1929, the economy showed signs of underconsumption. Inventories of unsold goods began to accumulate in warehouses as consumer demand slowed. Unequal distribution of income. Contributing to underconsumption and to the weakness of the economy was an unequal distribution of wealth. In the 1920s, at a time that a family needed an annual income of $2,500 to have a modest standard of living, over 60% of American families lived on only $2,000 per year, just enough to cover basic needs. Some 40% of all families had an income of less than $1,500, which put them below the poverty line. At the same time, the 24,000 richest families in the nation had a total income 3 times as large of the total income of the 6 million poorest families. She probably wants to go outside. In short, while 1% of the population owned 59% of the nation's wealth, 87% of the population owned only 10% of the wealth. So when you have such a large difference in income, it's not good. As a result, so now we're on page 192. As a result, the economy was dependent on the spending of a very small portion of the population. These wealthy people spent their money on luxury goods and on investments. This type of spending was greatly affected by the stock market crash. The wealthy, not the great mass of the population, had benefited from increased output per worker. With the increased output, production costs had dropped and corporate profits had risen, so richer getting richer. But overall, wages were stagnant or had only slightly increased. So people were only making the same amount of money, while the rich kept getting richer. Thank you. Thank you, kind sir. Often workers could not buy what they produced. So these people were making these items, but they couldn't afford to buy them. As a result, demand dropped. As the economy weakened, this non-purchasing group grew in size and became less and less able to buy even the necessities of life. Excessive buying on credit. Excessive buying on credit was one result of these low and unequally distribution of wages. The abundance of new products, the sense that these good times would never end, and the availability of easy credit encouraged people to spend money beyond their means. As the economy slowed, people bought less in order to pay their installment loans and home mortgages. This underconsumption led to decreased production and a rise in unemployment. Weak corporate structure. The stock market crash set off the collapse of the nation's business structure. Business consolidations in the 1920s resulted in a few large companies in each industry. Holding companies controlled the stock of many different corporations and depended on the earnings of the various companies they held. This was a very, very fragile system because when one company collapsed, it affected in a domino fashion the rest of the holding company. Weak banking structure. Some 6,000 banks failed in the 1920s. Many were rural banks that failed when farmers were unable to repay loans. Large banks were also vulnerable because they held inadequate reserves, investing too much in the stock market and making risky loans. Inadequate government policy. So inadequate means not good enough. Actions by the federal government contributed to the Depression. So these are political causes of the Great Depression. Stock market speculation was unregulated by the government. So the government wasn't checking on what people were doing, what companies were doing. Tax policies that favor the wealthy resulted in further uneven distribution of income. The consolidation of corporations was not challenged under antitrust laws. The Federal Reserve Board allowed a low discount rate, the interest charged to member banks. This policy led to stock speculation. The board then raised interest rates in 1931, discouraging spending at just the time when spending would have helped the economy. So this is one of the reasons why, if you're paying attention to the news right now, this is one of the reasons why they're talking about giving people money. The government is going to send out those checks because they want people to use those checks to put into the economy to help try to stimulate it. Weak international economy. The world's economies were affected by the collapse triggered by the crash of the United States stock market. Many European economies had never fully recovered from World War I, and the international economy depended heavily on the economy of the United States. Foreign nations owed the United States money from World War I that they could repay only after the United States bought their goods and made foreign investment and loans. In June 1930, Congress passed the Hawley-Smoot Act, raising tariffs on agricultural and manufactured goods to the highest level in American history. High American tariffs kept out goods from overseas and led to high foreign tariffs. Americans invested at home rather than abroad. When the economy slowed, the United States made even fewer foreign investments and had less money to spend. This meant that foreign nations had less money to buy American goods and often defaulted on loans. The international nature of the banking system can be seen by the fact that the banks in both Europe and the United States failed as a result of default on loans. All right, so I'm going to create a new video for Herbert Hoover. So I'm going to stop there. I will upload this one, and then we'll talk about Mr. Herbert Hoover.